haven't felt this productive in a long time. Got my talk done, got up, went for a run, ate a protein-rich breakfast, prayed a little bit. I wasn't mean to my kids. Still feel like I'm missing something though. There's church today? Yes, I would like a Milky Way frappe, please. I really got to get in shape. I pulled my quad in first service. I think I pulled the other one. Just a minute. We'll get there. How's everybody's week going? I got to get in shape. It really is the bottom line today, is that the pastor of this church has really let himself go. And because of that, I've been doing some research of what are the best ways to get in shape, what are some of the best practices, and really some of what makes a good gym a good gym. And I found some very interesting statistics that I thought I would share with you today that are going to be a little startling. At least they were for me. If you were to look through all of the American, I'm really out of breath. All of the American population, you would find that 64 million people have gym memberships. 64 million. That is 20% of the whole United States has a gym membership. It means that if we were to go down the aisle, just about every 4 or so people would say, yeah, I have one. And then what would be a really fun exercise is the people that said they do have one, if you said, do you use it? Because even more startling than 64 million is that 33% actually use it. That's not a good stat. It means that a lot of us have it, and we'll talk about our gym. We'll maybe even talk about our trainers and the machines and all the things, but we're not actually doing anything with it, right? We've gotten really good at saying things like, I got to get to the gym. I got to get back to the gym. And we've been throwing money away in the meantime, by the way. The average price of a gym membership is $58 per month. Now, do the math over 64 million people. The gym industry is a billions-dollar industry. What's crazy is that 66% of the billions they make for nothing. Because you and I sign up, we get the little thing for our key ring, and then we never go. They don't ever have to clean up after us. They don't ever have to give us a towel, none of that. Because we don't actually use it. And yet, we're all frustrated that we're not physically fit. Because you are probably like me, where you talked to somebody that was in really good shape, and they talked a lot about their gym. And you saw a commercial on TV, and there was a really cool celebrity pitching that gym to you, and you're like, I need that gym to be my gym. And so you go out and you get the membership and you think that it's just going to happen. I have a gym membership. This is what it's gotten me. Right? Like having a gym membership doesn't actually do anything. A gym membership's not enough to get in shape. You and I both know that you have to go inside the doors. You have to move some of those weights around. You have to make that treadmill work. You're going to have to sweat, and you're going to have to be out of breath, and you're going to have to feel miserable. You're going to have to do something with the membership in order for the membership to make any kind of difference. We get that when it comes to gyms. We don't always get that when it comes to other things, namely religion. For every frustrated gym member, there are 5 frustrated religion members. And what we're learning is religion isn't enough either. I know a lot of really religious people. You probably do too. You maybe grew up in what you would call a religious home. And then you go, I don't see any difference in those people's lives. Maybe for you, you go, I don't feel any difference in my life. This religion hasn't actually done anything for me. My guess is there's a few of us in this room or over in East or watching online that gave up the whole idea. We quit religion like we quit the gym. Because what good is it doing? I'm just saying I'm religious. I'm just saying I have a religion. I'm just saying I grew up in this kind of house, or I'm just saying I go to this church. And yet, it doesn't seem to have any real impact in my Monday through Saturday. All it's doing is taking up an hour or 2 of my week Sunday morning. Religion's just not enough. And it doesn't really even matter what religion you're a part of when we're talking about it in these terms. Just identifying with one and saying it's yours doesn't do anything. To make it more personal for me and maybe more personal for you, Christian isn't enough. Saying we're a Christian, I mean, what does that even mean anymore? Think about some of the Christians you know in your life. Some of the people that say, oh, I'm a Christian. They're some of the biggest liars and cheats and angry people you know. How does that work? What do we actually mean then when we say we're a Christian? Again, it quickly devolves into, well, here's what it means to be a Christian. I go to church. And I might even volunteer here and there, but if someone were to sit you down and ask you real intently, what does being a Christian actually do for you? You'd go, I made a few friends. But I don't know that it's making a lasting, altering, like life-altering impact. And here's the thing. When it comes to gym memberships, it didn't let you down. Gold's Gym, Planet Fitness, Anytime Fitness, any of these places, they have never let you down when it's come to your physical well-being. You have let you down. It's why this series, for me, is so important. When we're talking about gains, so many of us say, well, religion has let me down. Some of us would go so far as to say religion has let our country down. It's let our world down. And we might even start to argue that religion is bad for our world. It's bad for our families. It's bad for our friendships because it just divides us and turns us into, mean, bigoted kinds of people. And we turn our card in because we don't want anything to do with that. But what I want to do for the next few weeks is hopefully get you to reconsider that maybe it wasn't the religion that let you down, but you let you down. Because religion or faith or following Jesus is a lot like a gym membership in that you have to go do something. You have to start to move some things around in your everyday life. Showing up to church, singing along with the songs, and laughing at my stupid jokes is not enough. You will be frustrated. And if you're giving religion or faith or Jesus another try, I'm so glad that you're here for this series. Because what I want to do is give you a few things that I believe God uses in your everyday life to grow your faith, to strengthen your faith, to move you closer to Him. And what I'll promise you is that these things are not going to make your life perfect, but they will make your life better. They're not going to make it so that nothing bad ever happens in your life, but they will change how you navigate when those bad things happen. And that's the beauty of a strong faith. So what I want to do first is give you the entire series. Just in case something I say today makes you go, I'm never coming back, you at least know the 5 things that I believe God uses to grow our faith. And they are practical teaching, which we're going to talk about today. And just so you know, that's not going to be a pitch to like, here's why Josh is a great preacher. It's just going to be that you need to have teaching that helps you practice what is being taught. We also are going to need private practices. We'll hit on that next week. Personal ministry, providential relationships, and pivotal circumstances. I wish the last one was not on the list, by the way. I wish God did things differently than how He seems to do them, where oftentimes we're going to go through difficult circumstances. But make no mistake, God will use, can use, does use those moments to grow your faith. So today is really about practical teaching, but before I jump into that, I want to ask you a question. When you hear the idea of big faith, what does that mean to you? What comes to mind? What would it look like in your everyday life if you had big faith? Now, I know a lot of us are going to define that in terms of the big faith we've seen in other people. And you maybe know some people that they're like big faith people, and you go, but they're not big responsible people. Like, they just seem to float through life and off on a whim all of the time. Sometimes you might even be challenged to see somebody with big faith and go, I don't know that they're very immature. They kind of move with they're like naive when they go through life about what real life is all about. So the question is, what is big faith? For some of you, it might be more belief. I'll just believe more of this. I won't have as many questions about this. I won't have the uneasiness in my guts about some of what's taught, some of what I read. For others of us, it might be more tranquility, like Jedi peace. I just close my eyes and nothing bothers me, and sticks and stones don't break our bones anymore kinds of stuff. For some of us, big faith might be I'm more daring. Like a kid stepping up to the edge of the pool, we finally jump into the water, and we just believe it's going to work out in the end, right? Some of us would say it's more knowledge. I'm going to know a lot more about the Bible, and I'm going to know a lot more about God, and I'm going to know a lot more about church history and all of those kinds of things, and then I'd have big faith. For some of us, it's just I'd be happier. I wouldn't be lonely, and I wouldn't be depressed, and I wouldn't be lacking in self-esteem. I'd be happy with where I'm at and who I am, and that would be big faith. I'd kind of accept things for what they are, but I want to push you a little bit to think about big faith differently. Big faith is more trust. Having big faith is having big trust in God. And here's why I say that. If you go all the way back to the beginning, like the beginning, when Adam and Eve are running around in the garden, and they're told, hey, don't eat from this one tree because there's some bad things that are going to happen for you if you do, and I love you, so don't do that. And then the serpent comes along, you remember this part, and what the serpent does not do is tell an outright lie to Adam and Eve. What the serpent does, which actually is it's kind of a genius strategy, he gets them to question what God said. He gets them to start to wrestle with the idea of trusting a God that's telling them to do something they may not want to do, or keeping them from doing something that they do want to do. Is that really what he said? And why do you think he said that? Think he's hiding something from you? At some point along the journey, we decided we didn't want to trust God anymore. This is the human condition. And so if we were going to have big faith, I believe, for me, it would be I would start to trust him at his word and his motives and all of those things more. I would start to get back to the place it was supposed to be. And here's the thing. If I start to trust God more, then I start to act more. More trust would always lead to more action. Because if you do get to the edge of the pool as a little kid and your feet are right on the edge and you jump, you have jumped because you've arrived at a certain degree of trust in your parent that's in the water ready to catch you. Anything you've ever done that's required a leap of faith, you leapt based on some degree of the parachute will work, the bungee cord won't break, the person I'm falling in love with will love me back, right? Like all of those things require some additional degree of trust before you take the leap of faith. There will always be action, though. And for us to get to action as Jesus followers, as a church, as people of faith, we're going to need more application. And here's what I mean about application. We cannot settle for just reading the Bible. We cannot settle for just coming to church and listening to somebody like me give a talk that doesn't offend you and fits right in 35 minutes and you get out of here on time for kickoff and all those kinds of things. Like, it can't just be that. There needs to be a next step. There needs to be something that you and I are being challenged. I mean, a great teaching should make us a little uncomfortable because we know we're going to have to do something about it. We're going to have to apply it to our life. I've become convinced of one idea, especially around matters of faith. Knowing without doing makes knowing nothing. If you and I have a bunch of information about God or about the scriptures or this Christian thing, but we don't do anything about it, do we really know anything at all? We've got a lot of really, I guess you'd say, book-smart Christians in the world. For some reason, they have a really hard time having loving relationships with people, though, because there's some break between the education piece and the application piece. And those two are not, you cannot have them separated. And I say that because this is how Jesus always taught. Jesus was never like, let me tell you a bunch of information, let's pray, send you home. Jesus would always say, here's a bunch of information, and here's what you should do with that information. In fact, his most famous talk that he ever gave was called the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount is interesting because it's one that he gave over and over and over again. It wasn't just the one time. In fact, he'd take little pieces of it and he'd re-deliver it in different towns that he would go to. This is why sometimes when you read it in Matthew, the main kind of copy of it we have is Matthew 5 through 7. You'll see chunks of it, though, in different places in Mark and Luke and John because he would use these things over and over. He would repeat them. But they always ended with, now go and do this. And when he delivers the original, the Sermon on the Mount, he ends with a story. And the story is entirely about application. In some ways, he delivers, if you just break it up the way we have done with Matthew's biography of Jesus, there's really 2.5 chapters, almost 2 3/4 chapter, that is the Sermon on the Mount. And then the last little paragraph is this story about two guys that build houses. And the difference between the two guys is one applies what he knows and the other doesn't apply what he knows. I'll show you what I mean. This is what Jesus says at the end of that talk. Anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise, like a person who builds a house on solid rock. Right away, Jesus is getting to application because if he weren't, he would have just said, anyone who listens to my teaching is like a man who builds a house on solid rock. But that's not what he says. He says listens and follows. Now, when you read that word follow, you could look this up because we all read different translations of the Bible, and some of them are going to read a little bit different, but the main idea is still the same. So this one says follows. You might find puts into practice. You might find does them. No matter how you slice it, Jesus is getting at someone who hears what I'm saying and does something about what they heard what I said. They're the wise person. There's wisdom in doing something with what you learn. You know what this is like if you've had children. And if you haven't, you've heard this before, but there's this weird phenomenon that happens with kids, especially as they get into their teenage years. They start to think that hearing you and doing something about what they're hearing from you are two different things. So you might say, I'm still recovering, sorry. You might say to your teenager, hey, take out the trash. And they will signal that they've heard you with a, while they're playing video games, watching TV, texting their friend on their phone. You will return to the kitchen about an hour and a half later and still find the garbage there. And you don't say to them, why haven't you done what I asked you to do? You will say to them, why didn't you listen to me? You and I understand that hearing and doing go together. That to truly hear someone and listen to them means there will be action as a result. And Jesus says, this is exactly how it works with me. When you hear me instruct you on how to live a life like the way I live life, then you're going to need to go and do something with that. There's no, here's a bunch of information, and that's all. And just so we are on the same page, and this is a little bit of a rabbit trail, do not mistake complicated, difficult to understand teaching as deep teaching. That's a trap that we usually fall into. The more difficult it is for me to get my head around something, the deeper it must be. And I like being able to say that I'm a part of a religion with deep teaching that's really hard to understand. I have no idea what I'm supposed to do with it. You know why we like that? Because we don't have to do anything with it. The deepest teaching you will find is the teaching that makes you so uncomfortable that you know tomorrow I got to do it different. The deepest teaching is the one that finds a place where you can go, it's not hard for me to know what my next step is. And that's what made Jesus such a great teacher. He over and over again took the most complicated ideas, made them very simple, and gave very clear action steps. He says, so if you get that, if you do what I'm telling you to do based on what I've told you, then you're a wise man that builds your house on the rock. And here's what will happen when you do that. Though the rain comes in torrents and the floodwaters rise and the winds beat against that house, don't miss this, God did not say if, he said when. Jesus did not say that if you listen to what I'm saying and do something about it, then your life will be perfect and it will be sunny and 75 degrees, no humidity, all day, every day. He actually says the opposite. There will be storms, and it won't be raindrops falling on your head. It'll be blow you over torrential downpours. It's going to happen. But if you've listened to what I've said and done something with it, it won't collapse because the house was built on bedrock. It was built on solid rock. Your foundation is strong. And it was not just because you got a bunch of information. It was because Jesus said you followed the instructions. You did something with what you learned. This is the first point where Jesus could have stopped and he could have said, because here's the deal, knowing without doing makes knowing nothing. I could preach all day, Jesus would say. I could tell you about how the stars came to be and all of it. But if that doesn't make a difference tomorrow, what good is all this? How many things in our lives do we all know we should do, but we don't do? What good is knowing it at all then? This is kind of the idea that Jesus is getting at. And just in case it's not crystal clear with the guy who did it well, he tells the other side of the story where the guy did it poorly. And this is what we read next. But anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey it is foolish, like a person who builds a house on sand. Again, Jesus goes right into application. He says, anybody who hears what I'm saying but doesn't obey it, the obeying part is the action part. They're all in the same sentence. He does not leave any room for misinterpreting what he's getting at. And so that you don't misunderstand what I'm getting at, I'm not suggesting there's a bunch of stuff you got to do to earn your way to heaven. Not the case. You don't have to do a bunch of stuff to get God to like you and love you. He already loves you. But our response to that love is a response, not just a knowing. We're going to do something because of that. We're going to do something with that. Now here Jesus uses the word doesn't obey. Other translations are going to say things like doesn't do them or doesn't work them into your life. And I always think about it like the countless applications that you all have on your smartphone. I know you have countless ones because I have countless ones, most of which I don't use. You ever notice that? You've probably brought your phone into the Geek Squad at Best Buy or whatever phone company you're with, and you're like, well, my phone's broken. And they take a couple minutes to look through it, and they're like, no, you just have 1,000 applications. And according to the log that we have here, you haven't opened 990 of them in the last 3 months. And that takes up space, and the more space it takes up, the less your phone can actually do freely. You're going to need to remove some of them. A lot of us have these applications that can do amazing things, but we don't do anything with them, and in the end, they actually bog us down. They become a burden. And sometimes that's how Christianity feels, isn't it? It's a bunch of stuff to know that feels like a burden because we don't actually do anything with it. And this guy doesn't do anything with what he knows about building a house. And he builds it on sand that when the rain comes, like Jesus says, it washes the sand out from underneath the house, and the house comes crumbling down. When the rains and floods come and the winds beat against that house, it will collapse with a mighty crash. This is where a lot of us live. A storm comes into life. We lose our job. We go through a divorce. Our kids get sick. We have something catastrophic happen to our home, and it's going to cost a fortune to repair it. We get into a disagreement with our parents. The storm rolls in, and we get upset that our religion didn't make it better. We get angry that our Christianity or our faith didn't just fix it. But I think Jesus might, at least with me, he would stop me and he'd go, but listen, I told you to not build houses on sand. You did not apply what I told you to do. Is it the house's fault or the builder's fault? Is it the structure's fault or the one who decided to build it the way it's been built? Because I told you what to do. You just didn't apply it. Here's the thing about these two guys that Jesus is telling this story about. Both of them learned how to build a house. They both went to house building school. And they probably both got really good grades. Like they learned you use this in this certain context and you connect it here and it's got to be at this angle and there's got to be so many shingles per square foot of roof and it's got to be at this pitch and all these kinds of things. They learned all of that. It's not like the wise man got all the schooling and the foolish man didn't and he just made an honest mistake. That's not what Jesus says. They both knew how to learn how to build a house. In fact, they both could tell you how to build a house. And this is most Christians, by the way. They're really good at telling you how to be a Christian, right? Not always real good at it themselves. Some of you are nodding because you're like, that's why I don't go to church, because I'm just tired of that dynamic. We've got so many Jesus followers that are so good at telling everybody else what it means to follow Jesus and what they do and what they don't do and how they're going to be judged and blah, blah, blah. And we never think, well, what am I doing? Like literally, what am I doing with all this stuff that I know? We could tell everybody else all day. And then what happens is some of those same Christians have the proverbial you-know-what hit the fan, and the whole thing comes tumbling down. I've seen it with pastors, people like me, that stand up here and do a really good job of telling you how you should live and how you should just believe and you should have big faith. And then something happens to them, and that faith goes out the window. It washes away with the storm. Both knew how to build a house. Both could tell you how to build a house, but one guy failed to actually build a house. Because a house is designed and should be built in such a way that protects you from a storm instead of falling down on top of you in the storm. So he put something together, and it looked good, and it maybe even got a few bids on Zillow or whatever. But at the end of the day, he did not build a house because it didn't do what houses are supposed to do. And the problem is, they both had the education, but only one did the application. They both had the learning, they both had the head knowledge, but only one actually put it into practice with his hands. If you think for 1 second, and I know this is a story that Jesus is just telling, but if you think for 1 second, the guy that put a whole house together on sand didn't know that you shouldn't build a house on sand, think again. He just wanted to cut a corner. He just wanted to do it faster. Or he didn't trust the instructions and thought he knew better and got into trouble as a result. You've probably been wondering why I have this paint can here. Isn't it interesting that I've done nothing with that for about 25 minutes, but so many of you have been distracted by that? Every few seconds, you're like, is he going to do something with that? I mean, he made Carson carry it out here. What? This is a lot like what happens in a lot of churches. Knowledge unapplied is a lot like paint unapplied. Pointless. Until I walk over here and I take this paintbrush and I dip it into the paint and start applying it to the wall, is this actually even paint? Until that point, it is a distraction. It is a problem. You know how this works, because odds are in the corner of your garage, you have 6 or 7 of these babies. And they've been there for 15 years. And every once in a while, somebody's like, when are you going to get rid of those paint cans? You're like, I don't know. I just got to hold them forever. Because knowledge unapplied becomes a burden. Knowledge unapplied becomes a distraction. Until you actually start doing the things with this that it's supposed to do. And even at the end of the day, you don't even know there's actually paint in here until I've started to do something with it. So how big is our faith until we do something with it? How big is what we believe and the God we believe in? Until we go, okay, here's what I know, and here's what I'm going to do because of what I know. At the end of the day, knowing without doing makes knowing nothing. No value until we apply it. And so what I want to give you is a framework that I hope you'll start applying to every talk you listen to. Not just the ones that I might give, but the ones you'll watch on YouTube or you'll listen to on the radio or podcasts or whatever it is. I hope that you'll apply this framework to every faith-based book that you read, every essay that you read, every blog post that you read, every podcast that you listen to. You start to ask a few simple questions that will hopefully help you identify, is this teaching practical? Does it have something for me that I can actually start to practice? Because I don't need any more head filling. I need hands fueling. So the first question is this: what do I need to know? Because there is an education piece to this. So when you get done or halfway into or whatever, the book, the podcast, the talk, start asking yourself, what are they telling me that I need to actually know? What am I learning that I didn't know until I picked this book up or started into this talk? And in case you're wondering, I'll break this down in real time of what we're doing. If you were to ask me, well, what is it that you would say we need to know? I would want you to know that knowing without doing is knowing nothing. That's it. That those two things go together. You can't know something and not do something about it. If you can't answer that question, I'm going to encourage you to find a new podcast. Close the book and find another one. Because Jesus always drove towards application. He always drove towards practical. So why would we settle for anything less? What do I need to know? Second question is, what do I need to do? What's an action step that I can take based on what I'm hearing? And in my opinion, that should be laid out pretty clearly. Like you should trip over it when you're thinking through all of it. So you might be wondering, okay, so what do we need to do based on what you're talking about? We're talking about what you need to do. Sometimes application is just thinking a little bit differently about stuff. So I would want you to know that knowing without doing makes knowing nothing. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to start asking everything you're taking in from a Christian perspective, maybe even in general, what it is that I need to know, and what do I need to do as a result of what I know? That's the application. I believe if you could start doing that, you might start to find some teaching that really starts to help you grow your faith. The last question is simple. And why do I need to know and do any of that? You could break it down like this. The knowing piece is the education. The doing piece is the application. And if you can answer the why piece, that's the inspiration. And being inspired to do something based on what you know, well, that's Christianity. That's following Jesus. My inspiration for you, the why I think you need to ask these questions, is because of where we started. We all want our faith to matter. We want it to do something for us. And constantly just filling our heads with a bunch of knowledge, more and more and more, it's going to end up being more of a burden than a help. Can you imagine if you were regularly consuming practical teaching that helped you put into practice what you believe? How different that would make this whole journey for you. You'd start to realize that knowing without doing makes knowing nothing. You might start to experience some gains in your faith. Don't fall into the trap of believing that just teaching is going to help you grow. Practical teaching that allows you to do something like Jesus encouraged us to do. That's what will make all the difference. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you for being a practical teacher. Thank you for never giving us just information without application. Thanks for being someone that wants our faith to grow. And that you have allowed us, honestly, to live in the 21st century where we can get our hands on any book and any talk and any podcast and any blog post with the tap of a finger. We are blessed to live in that day and age. So help us to be good stewards of that opportunity, will you? So that our faith can grow, not so that we can be more daring or more tranquil or whatever, but so that we can trust you more. That alone will change everything. And God, before I say amen, I do want to pray for the Hanschke family. Lord, I know that maybe not everybody here knows that Tom and Gail's son, Reed, was struck by a car while he was running, and that he's in the ICU, and he's clinging to you, literally, for dear life. And as a parent, I cannot even attempt to understand or feel what they're feeling. So all I know how to ask you for is that you'd give Tom and Gail real peace. And for Reed, that you would comfort him, that he would know in his soul that you're right there with him. And we'll just ask that you give the doctors wisdom in the decisions that they make, and that they would do the right things at the right time. And that this would be a story of healing and a long life from here on. Thanks for being a God that listens and cares when we're going through it. Be the solid foundation for this family. In Jesus' name, amen.